Yes, no Irish need apply. The various 19th century broadsides on this topic. I'm going to be talking about the various songs with that title or on that theme, which appeared on Broadside in songsters and in sheet music, mainly in the 19th century. I will be looking at the songs themselves, and I'm not going to be talking about the social background of anti-Irish prejudice or discrimination against Irish people. And I'm also going to be concentrating on the I was just reading that off the screen there. I'm going to be concentrating on the sort of printing and performance history of the songs rather than any analysis of the texts. If you know a song called No Irish Need Apply, it probably sounds a bit like this.
I'm a decent boy just landed from the town of Ballyfad. I want a situation, yes, and want it very bad. I seen employment advertised, 'tis just the thing, says I. But the dirty spell being ended with no Irish need apply. Who, says I, but that's an insult, though to get the place I'll try. So I went to see the blackguard with his no Irish need apply. Some do think it a misfortune to be christened Potter Dan, but to me it is an honour to be born an Irishman.
So, where did Pete Seeger get that song from? And luckily, he gave an interview in which he told us. He said it was created from two songs from the 1860s. One had better verses and the other had a better chorus. So I kind of amalgamated the two and stuck them together, put them out in the People's Song Bulletin, which was in 1948. And it's been sung that way ever since. And I think that's true. But what are these two songs from the 1860s? Well, it's actually only one of the songs is from the 1860s. And there are at least 5 songs that sometimes have that title. Here they are, and you can see that I've just labelled them A to E. You can see that they have completely different first lines. You can see we know who wrote 3 of them, and we know exactly when some were published and roughly when others were published. So I'm going to go through those different songs. They are all different, but they have many similarities. And one similarity is that only one, which I'm calling Song C, has a bit of a narrative. The most of them just sort of start with a verse about being discriminated against, and then the rest is really just about the virtues of the Irish people, their hospitality, their prowess as soldiers, their value as poets and everything, but not really a story. And the tone is often humorous, and the songs often appeared in collections of comic songs rather than serious political songs, should we say. The first song is this one, which we know almost exactly when it was written, because we have this review of a performance at a music hall in London in 1861, where the reviewer says, a song called No Irish Need Apply, written by her husband, was a masterpiece. And following that performance, it appeared on Broadsides and in songsters in Britain, and even by 1864 had crossed over to America. Now here are 2 of the early versions. On the left is Patty's Christmas Box Songster, which I reckon can be dated to 1861, so that's consistent with that newspaper review. And on the right is a Disley Broadside. And here is the lady herself on the cover of the sheet music for this song. And on the sheet music it says written by F.R. Phillips and sung by all the leading vocalists of the day. And indeed it was sung by other people, notably by Sam Collins, the music hall singer and proprietor of Collins Music Hall in Islington. But strangely, there are quite significant differences between the words in the sheet music that I've seen and the broadsides and songsters. For example, the sheet music has a verse about the Crimean War. At Balaclava, Inkerman, and through the Russian war, did not the Irish bravely fight as they oft done before? And that people often quote that verse, but it only appears in some of the texts. The copies of the sheet music that I've seen, there's only 2 copies that I've tracked down, and they both say 10th edition and date from about 1865. So possibly the earlier editions had the same words as the Broadsides, but I don't know. That sheet music actually has an extra stanza as well. But there's other sort of more subtle differences. In the Broadsides, we have a couplet that reads, "It is myself the place will suit, but I cannot tell you why. The lady said, did you not read? No Irish need apply." And in the sheet music, we have, "If you want a decent servant, ma'am, I'm just the one, says I. But the mistress said, did you not read? No Irish need apply." And that is obviously about a young woman seeking a job as a domestic servant. So some writers refer to a lady's version of this song. So it's possible that this one where it is obviously about a job as a domestic servant. It's possible that is what this so-called ladies' version is about, but that doesn't sort of explain why it's got a reference to the Crimean War. The song, as we've said, is credited to F.R. Phillips, who was a music hall performer, though somewhat overshadowed by his wife, I think. And confusingly, as was common at the time, Mrs. Phillips used her husband's initials and was known as Mrs. F.R. Phillips. So when you see a reference to F.R. Phillips, you sometimes can't work out whether it is the man or the woman. Some modern writers credit the song to Mrs. Phillips, and one possibility is that she was responsible for this so-called ladies' version. But unless we can find some more sheet music and other information, that's as far as we can go. The second song is this one, which is American. You can see there a broadside published in Philadelphia on the left, and sheet music published in Cleveland in 1863. This was written and sung by one Kathleen O'Neill, who was Irish, born in Dublin, went over to England and performed in the music hall in London, and in 1861 moved to New York. And the sheet music there is dated 1863, and there's a newspaper item referring to her having sold the copyright in the song in 1863, which seems to me some sort of index of the popularity of the song if a commercial publisher was prepared to pay money to her to publish it. And yet again, it's about a young woman looking for a job as a domestic servant. The first 6 stanzas seem to refer to a situation in Britain, but in the last stanza, there's the line, "Now I'm in the land of the glorious and free," which sort of suggests that the narrator of the song has followed the same trajectory as the writer in coming from Ireland to Britain and then over to America. It appears on broadsides, in songsters, and on sheet music in America, though not in Britain or Ireland, as far as I know. It uses the same tune as Song A, my theory is it was inspired. It's a completely different song, but I think it was inspired by the Phillips song. Wild speculation says that maybe she heard the song in London before she went to America and decided to write her own song on the same theme. At the top of the song, there's a sort of little quote of an advertisement. One smart, active girl wanted to do general housework. No Irish need apply, which is said to come from the Times newspaper in 1862. a search on the British newspaper archive does not reveal this advertisement in the Times for 1861 to 1863, but there are certainly lots of very many advertisements for domestic servants, and a small but obviously significant number that do say no Irish need apply, including an interesting one that's an advertisement for a job in a Catholic household that says no Irish need apply. And it is interesting to me that this is yet again a song about discrimination against young women looking for jobs as servants, rather than what you get the impression from some people writing about no Irish need apply, that it's all about men working as labourers or in factories or whatever. And the third song is definitely about a man. This one is another American one, seemingly first published the same year as Kathleen O'Neill's song, appearing in this New Irish Comic Songster in 1863. And in Broadsides, you can see an example of a Damason broadside on the right there. This was an original song by John F. Poole, written for and sung with immense success by the great comic vocalist of the age, Tony Pastor. It seems John F. Poole was born in Ireland and moved to America, where he wrote plays and wrote songs, often for Tony Pastor, who was an American variety performer and impresario, founded a theatre, regarded as maybe the founder of American variety. He was actually from an Italian American background, Tony being Antonio. Yes, as I said, the first appearance seems to be in this Tony Pastor's New Irish Comic Songster of 1863. There are a small number of subsequent American broadsides and songsters, but again, nothing from Britain or Ireland. I can't find any sheet music or recordings or anything like that, so we don't know what the tune was. But it is definitely the source of Pete Seeger's verses. And looking at the tunes in a bit more detail, the sheet music, looking at the sheet music for the first two songs, show that the tune is called Will You Come to the Bower, which Morris dancers might know as the Vandals of Hammerwich, and I know as What Have You Got for Dinner, Mrs. Bond?
We know as Will You Come to the Bower?
Yes, yes. So the song, the Tony Pastor song, could be the same tune, but we don't know. Some authors say that the tune is The Spider and the Fly by Thomas Hudson, but if you look at Hudson's collected works, he says the tune is Will You Come to the Bower? Will You Come to the Bower, I think, is an 18th century tune, which Thomas More used later for a poem called Will You Come to the Bower I Have Shaded for You, which is not at all the same thing as the alleged Fenian recruiting song, Will You Come to the Bower, or The Free Boundless Ocean. And one index of popularity of a ballad, I think, is whether other people then write ballads and say it's sung to the same tune. And here we have at least 11 ballads written which are specified as being sung to the tune No Irish Need Apply. There's 3 British ones, so they must relate to the Phillips song. The American ones, well, actually could relate to the Poole version or O'Neill maybe, or even Phillips, because by that time Phillips had been published in America. One is actually in the Tony Pastor songbook, so that must be related to his version. It's interesting that one called Victoria's General Grant says the tune is No Irish Need Apply, but then a later printing of that same ballad says it's The Spider and the Fly. But we've just established they're the same tune anyhow. Except that is quite interesting, but because if it's an American song and it's relating to the Pool Pastus version, then maybe that means that was sung to the same tune as the other two. Two of those songs appear in this. Two of those songs appear in this songster called 617 Irish Songs and Ballads. I assume that 617 is the number of songs they could get in that number of pages, because I'm not sure why you would choose that number otherwise. And I'm going to refer to that in a few minutes because it crops up again. And that image there actually comes from the Irish Traditional Music Archive website, which means they have a copy. So then I have asked myself, does that mean this circulated in Ireland, or did it get it from somewhere completely different? Also, in another index of popularity of a ballad is the number of people who write replies to it. And here there are 4 songs which are described themselves as being replies to No Irish Need Apply. They're not really replies in the sense of a reply that contradicts the original song, because they say more or less the same thing. You know, that Irish are being discriminated against, but they shouldn't be. And one, if we look, the most interesting is this one, which I call Song D, because it was originally published as The Irish May Apply. And when it went over to America in the 1890s, it was then changed to No Irish Need Apply. And now this is where I mention the only Irish broadside I'm going to mention in the whole of this talk, which is one printed by Catherine Haley of Cork, of whom we have heard already today. And from John Malden's thesis, I gather that must have been between 1859 and 1870. There are London printings of roughly the same period, though they have one fewer stanza, and on which basis you'd say, well, the Haley version must be the earliest. But if you actually look at the text, there's sort of what seem to me obvious corruptions in the Haley text. So I'm forced to posit an unknown previous version here, but which I don't like doing, but that's my answer to that. The Disley printing is interesting because it specifies a tune, the Captain with the Whiskers, which is not the same as Will You Come to the Bower, but to my mind is a similar sort of tune. I know that as I Wish They'd Do It Now, and you probably know it as The Wearing of the Green. And here we have the Disley broadside on the left there. So not Disley, Haley on the left and the one from Such on the right. And finally, we come to this one, which is actually called No Irish Wanted here. On the left is a page from that Wayman 617 songs, and then I've just enlarged it on the right there. It was printed in other American songsters of that sort of period, and it's the only one of these songs that ever passed into the oral tradition. And you can see there's 3 that come from North America, 1 from Ireland, and 1 from Cecilia Costello in Birmingham. But Cecilia Costello was from an Irish family, and apparently learned a lot of her songs from her father from Roscommon. Anyhow, just very briefly, I'll give you Lena.
They say I'm an honest Irish labourer with courage stout and strong. Idleness I never love, to our race it don't belong. I dearly love to work and toil for those I love so dear, but every place I look for work, no Irish wanted here.
Which is, I think that's a lovely tune myself. And both that one is on. It was collected by Helen Harkness Flanders, as was the one from Bell Luther Richards, and they are actually available on the Internet Archive. Interestingly, Bell Luther Richards' version borrowed stanzas from Song D, and my theory is that's because they both are printed in Wayman's 617 songs. So someone wanting a few more verses just borrowed some from a different song. And interestingly, all these tunes seem like the Seeger song seem to be in 6/8, as opposed to the 2/4 of Will You Come to the Bower or The Captain with the Whiskers. But this is where Seeger got his chorus from. And just to finish off, the Wolf Tones perform what I think is songy with extra verses and their own tune. There are some other modern songs. There's a wonderful, if you haven't seen it, wonderful YouTube clip of the Clancy Brothers and Tommy Macon performing for President Kennedy in 1963. I think that's their own song, and there's another one by Tommy Macon on the same theme. But as Seeger said, most people perform his version, which is verses from Song C and half the chorus from Song E.
They think it our misfortune to be christened Potter down, but to me it is an honour to be born an Irishman.
Thank you, Martin. Very good. Very good. One of the things that struck me straight away is that people are always telling me that the oral tradition has lots of variation in their songs, and it's, you know, if a song varies a lot, it must have been in the oral tradition, and the print tradition sort of fixes the text, and you know, this shows us that's complete nonsense. The print tradition can vary just as much as the oral tradition, can't it?
Well, yes, I mean, you're right, but I mean, I don't regard these as variants. I regard them as 5 separate songs on the same theme. I mean, because I don't think, I mean, as I said, it may be that Kathleen O'Neill was inspired by the Phillips song to write her own, but it is a completely different song.
Yes, but
even though the line verses all end no Irish.
Even within the same song, you're quoting different versions.
There are different, yes.
Different broadsides.
There's quite a lot of things where, yes, where verses have disappeared or completely new verses have appeared in the song. Yeah.
Which is why you've made me create new numbers for all these different. I used to have. I was quite happy with one number for No Irish Need Apply, and now they're all over the place. Any questions in the room? And do we?
We know currently a member of the Boleyn sings that quite regularly, and he learned it from Frank Hart, but he has written an extra verse to cater for the current xenophobia in Ireland against foreign workers. So it's a living tradition. It will still keep going, and it changes as it moves along.
Yes, I mean, Pete Seeger used 3 verses from the original Broadside, but people like Frank Harper have gone back to that original and reinstated verses from the original. And as you say, I mean, yes, maybe even written extra verses, because it's about No Irish Need Apply, but of course the Irish aren't the only people who suffered discrimination in seeking work.
You haven't noticed any other nationalities or ethnicities?
I think there was
borrowing the song, sort of, you know, no Indians need apply or no so and so. I think are not songs. No, I think there were definitely newspaper advertisements which said things like no Polish need apply or whatever. Have we got any online? Oh, sorry.
Just to note the fact that the book, the 617, did circulate in Ireland. Tommy Munnelly noticed that Tom Lennon had got Paddy's trying to see it from.
Oh, that's
Yes.
that is interesting. Yes, because as I say, all I had to go on was the fact that Itmar has it. But no, that's very interesting to know. Thanks.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you say that there are two versions in there that it looks like somebody's combined.
Yes, I mean,
From there.
there are, I can't remember how many songs, some of those other, two of those things to the tune of are in Wayman as well. So there's at least 4 songs in Wayman that sort of come into this melting pot.
Anybody, do we have any online questions? No. Well, thank you, Martin. That was very good.